everyone. Welcome. I'm going to call to order the Housing Finance and Policy Committee for February 8th, 2022 at about 1:10. Sorry for the delay. We have a few little technical issues. Senator Rosen is in the room, but we will get her on camera soon. So just so everybody's aware, I think we have everybody here. Thank you. Commissioner, are you ready to go?
I am ready to go.
Thank you. Take it away.
Do you have a sense of how much of the whole hearing time you want me to use? I have quite a bit of detail today, and I just want to make sure that I am pacing myself in a way that meets your expectations, sir.
I was thinking maybe half the committee time, Commissioner, if that works for you. And then we'll do questions and then get to our other testifiers.
That sounds perfect. I will keep, so that's shaving off the 10 minutes, got it. First of all, RentHelpMN members of the committee, it's good to be back. And have an opportunity to provide quite a bit of detail about where we're at with the RentHelpMN Federal Emergency Rental Assistance Program. I have about 20 slides, but I will move through them so that we can get to questions. I look forward to your questions. Let me just start by focusing on the overall goals of the emergency rental assistance standard. I think Dan Kitzberger is in charge of my PowerPoint. I'll just acknowledge him, my legislative director, and Ryan Baumtrog, my assistant commissioner for policy and community development, who are with me today. So when we created RentHelpMN, we knew it was a temporary emergency aid program with two primary goals. One was to maintain housing stability for renters who are at risk of losing their housing during a pandemic. And also it was support for property owners facing a loss of income during a time where they had ongoing expenses, bills to pay. And so I always characterized RentHelp as a one-time federal gift that could be a win-win for renters and owners alike who were having trouble paying their bills. Today I'm going to talk a lot about numbers, just a lot of key things. But one thing that's been really clear to me throughout this program is that it's really about people. And I've had a chance to hear from, talk with the frontline staff that are doing the daily work with, hear from both renters and owners alike throughout the course of this program. And I think the federal assistance was deeply appreciated, and but I also know that now that we've stopped taking applications, people are worried. And so it's not just numbers. These are moms with kids, these are veterans, these are elderly couples, these are people with disabilities, these are families with teenagers who are juggling school life. This is real people. And I think as we sit here in February of 2022, none of us would have thought the consequences of the pandemic would have lasted this long. We know the need's not over, even though we've stopped taking applications, and it's, I think it's just a hard part of this. I want to start with a quote from one of our field partners. We have nonprofits and community action programs that are working directly with people out there. So Deanna talks about having support for overdue rent being a huge source of support and relief. That word relief is something that we hear a lot from both the property managers and the renters. And the fact that people have been able to avoid having huge amounts of unpaid rent has given people some freedom to address other critical areas in their life. I think, Deanna talked about the fact that, a lot of people lost jobs initially and then were called back, but oftentimes it reduced hours, some lost wages, the need to quarantine, or because they or their family members got sick. So even folks who have gone back to work, it didn't go back to the way it was before the pandemic. We talked a lot to property managers. I also wanted to just lead with the perspective of property managers. Next slide, please. Just how scary this was at the beginning of the pandemic and how stressful it was. trying to work out payment plans with people, helping property managers and residents working together to apply. And if the program hadn't been available, really, I think the sense from property managers that people would have become homeless. It's just a nod to D.W. Jones that it has over 120 complexes and, roughly 5,000 units, many of which are targeted to low and moderate income citizens. One of the other things, next slide please, that we have done is that Minnesota housing staff, kind of above and beyond their regular jobs, have been available to all 10 court districts for housing court. The evictions off-ramp ties evictions protections to whether or not people have a pending application. So we've been able to help the courts understand people's application statuses for over 1,300 court cases since we started doing this last fall. And a lot of a partnership really with the courts that wasn't something that Minnesota Housing historically has been that involved in. So moving then into the numbers, next slide please. A reminder that this was 2 allocations affectionately known federally as ERA 1 and ERA 2. ERA 1 was passed in December of 2020 as a part of the Consolidated Budget Act, signed into law by the previous president. ERA 2 passed in March of 2021 with the American Rescue Plan. Some money went out to counties and cities. The state received $673 million in total, of which $537 million came directly or is coming directly to Minnesota Housing. When you back out admin costs and housing stabilization services, the cost of the field partners, 211, the processing, we estimated it to be about $450 million available for direct assistance. I want to step back and just remind folks of the time frame. Next slide, please.
Commissioner, real quick on that last slide.
Sure.
Why is it estimated 450? Why isn't that a hard number?
Chairman Draheim, thank you for the question. There are a lot of moving parts on this program, including the fact that Treasury doesn't pay out everything to us at once. And so we've wanted to have certainty around our getting what we need from Treasury. There also is money that is reserved for administration, but we don't know what our final administrative costs will be. There's also money that can be used for housing stabilization services encouraged by the Congress and the Treasury. We also didn't know exactly how much payout we would have to do in terms of you have to actually process every request that comes in before we know actual payout rates and the percentage of applications that are eligible and that we pay on versus those that are ineligible that we decline. And there's been the possibility held out that the Treasury would reallocate money, so the possibility that we could have received more.
So
we were really
Commissioner, when do you think you'll have all the funding from Treasury then? If the program's ended, I mean, do you have a pretty good idea when you would have hard numbers?
Chairman, thank you for that question, and it gives me the opportunity to clarify the difference between the program ending and the program deadline for accepting new applications. On January 28th at 9 p.m., we had deadline for accepting new applications, but as you'll see in the coming slides, we actually took in a lot of applications in January, so it will actually take a while before we've processed all the payments, and so it will be a while before we have final resolution of the numbers because we need to actually process each of those requests.
Okay, thank you. I do have another question here in the room. Senator Duckworth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. And hello, Commissioner. Very good to see you. It would be a kind of a follow-up to the question that Chair Draheim asked, which is if we're questioning kind of how much of the funds were available to go to direct assistance, do you have an idea of how much of the funding were used for administrative costs and or housing stability services? And if you don't have that offhand, if that could be included in some of the numbers that you're trying to get some final fidelity of.
Commissioner?
Chairman and Senator Duckworth. Senator Duckworth, nice to see you again. So the easiest way to think about the math is the way that the Congress defined the math, which is that in ERA 1, they allowed 10% of the program to be available for admin. In ERA 2, I think they recognized that 10% was very difficult to run a program of this size, so they allowed 15% for admin. And then in ERA 2, they also allowed and encouraged 10% for housing stabilization services. We have not yet spent any money on the housing stabilization services. We're currently in an RFP for $9 million for housing stabilization services. So since we weren't certain when we closed what the total amount to be paid would be, if I can move through the slides, I can kind of show you what needs to happen to get to the final resolution of the numbers. But it will take several months before we have a good understanding of how much is being paid out for the significant number of applications that we received in January. But we really, based on our experience with previous months, there's what people ask for, and there's what's eligible and what's paid, and you don't actually know actual amounts paid until you get each individual request all the way resolved.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think there's one follow-up. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Commissioner. A follow-up for you regarding that $9 million specifically. Do you have the flexibility, if we've exhausted funds for helping people with rental assistance, can that $9 million be something that is then diverted or used for that purpose instead, or is that something that you don't have the flexibility to do, or is it something that agency would give consideration to?
Commissioner?
Chairman and Senator Duckworth, first of all, I just want to put this in perspective. I pay out about $3 million a day. So $9 million is about 3 days worth of payments. And the over-under estimate on how much I will pay out for applications that are in the queue, the range on that is bigger than that. So yes, do I consider some of the funds that could be used for housing stabilization services there to help be a buffer if I received more applications than I have money to pay out? Yes. But as you'll see in my presentation, it's not a big enough of a buffer to have allowed me to stay open to pay February rent, which was part of the decision that we had to make in January.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll let you get back to your slides.
We're on slide 7, so let's see. I wanted to just step back and remind folks of the time frame. This was the allocation December of 2020, the first one. And then during a change in administrations, we were getting guidance from the outgoing administration, we got an incoming administration. They said, hold off for a minute, let us take a look at it. We got new guidance. We worked RFPs in order to put all the parts of the puzzle together for how the program runs. And we then found out while we were implementing ERA 1 that there was going to be ERA 2. We opened the applications on April 20th. We started making payments on May 20th. We hit a critical Treasury date of September 30th in terms of having 65% of ERA 1 funds committed, which was great. Made us eligible for other people's money if they weren't going to spend it in other states. We had the critical dates happening with the evictions off-ramp that you passed last summer. The Treasury had done revised guidance on paying for residents of vacated units that we put into play on October 15th. And then when we saw the activity in January that was picking up pace, we made a program change. We used to pay rent arrearages plus 3 months going forward, and we switched that to paying 1 month forward to allow us to serve more people. And then the closed to new applications occurred Friday, January 28th at 9 p.m. So those are kind of the step back timelines. Next slide, please.
So Commissioner, real quick on that last slide, that January 10th date, so does that mean you're paying February rent then? If you're doing 1 month forward, so if they applied before January 10th, are they paying just that 1 month, which would be January and then February, or how does that work when they're in that last month?
Thank you, Chairman. So let's say that somebody applied in January and they were only behind in January, just for the sake of it. They could apply for January arrearages plus 1 month of February. If somebody didn't have past due rent, then they weren't eligible to apply in January. And there's a caveat on the funds for the forward rent based on availability of funds. But we really tried to manage the closing to new applications so that we would have as much confidence as we could have that we'd be able to pay what came in the door, as opposed to sitting with a bunch of applications that we knew we wouldn't be able to pay.
Thank you.
So next slide. We always knew this was a one-time temporary source of funding from the federal government. It was big, $500 million. It was a short duration. We knew that there was going to be a lot of need, and that there was, when we started, that there was going to be pent-up demand. We knew that the RentHelpMN got kind of tied in, along with the other local jurisdiction emergency rental assistance programs, to the evictions off-ramp, and so that was going to be important. And then also we just kind of were working with the U.S. Treasury Department on different things at different times. I think one of the things that is striking is just how many people this program has helped. This is a really big program, but I think the fact that it's one time is also going to be kind of jarring to people who had come to rely upon it. Next slide, please. We really wanted to make sure that we were reaching the renters who were most at risk of losing their homes. The federal government allowed people up to 80% of the area median income to be eligible for the program, but we really did a lot of our targeting to really make sure we were reaching low-income renters, and I think this slide said it all. 89% are earning less than 50% of area median income. 70% are below 30% of area median income. And we know that you just take a look at the demographics of low-income renters, tends to be more households of color. And so I think we feel good that the program met the people that it was intended to serve. Next slide, please. So this slide, I think, is as clear a visual as I can provide to help understand what we were seeing in January that led to the decision to close in January, that we couldn't stay open into February. In April, we were just open for 10 days, 11 days. May, had been the first full month, which is really, we would have expected a surge of applications at the beginning. We did. We saw that. But what you begin to see is after the kind of slowdown in the summer, that as the various clicks of the dial on the evictions moratorium shifted. We started to see just kind of a continued growth in the number of applications that were coming in through the fall, so that December was almost as large as May. And then what we saw in the opening weeks of January is that January was starting to shape up to be the largest month of applications, just if we were kind of operating normally. We were talking to other states who had already closed their programs to new applications, and everybody said that you will get another surge of applications when you announce that you're going to close. And all told, when you take a look at the number of applications that we took through January 28th, January was by far the largest number of applications the program had ever seen. And so, you know, we were really kind of doing, and it really felt like something that had been accelerating through the fall, started accelerating even faster in January, and was really leading us to have to answer the question of whether or not we could stay open for February applications in real time as the applications were coming in. Next slide, please.
Commissioner, we have another question in the room here. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the context you're giving the bar graph for January, because in looking at this, obviously it's very striking. And if you don't have that additional context, the story it tells can be, I think, kind of confusing. So I want to make sure I understand you correctly. Is the gap in this bar graph to show to indicate how many applications came in after it was announced that this program was ending? I'm assuming the graph is as high as it is. I think I understood you correctly, because once this program was announced that it would be ending and people realized they didn't have much time to act, applications shot through the roof. Is that a correct interpretation of what you experienced at the agency?
Commissioner.
Chairman and Senator Duckworth, thanks for that question. I've got a little bit more detail in terms of what we saw happen between the announcement and the deadline for new applications. But I think what this really illustrates is that prior to the announcement being made of the closure, applications were already coming in at a record-setting pace, which forced the decision around whether we needed to close in January or stay open in February. We anticipated that there would be a rush, but it really, January 21st that's marked on this is really when it became very clear that January was going to be a record-breaking month, even without the announcement of a deadline for applications. And so it was important for us to decide quickly how to put that deadline into place so that we weren't becoming, going into February and becoming oversubscribed, which we think would have been a very difficult situation to be in. I've got a little bit more data in some later slides, but does that answer your question, Senator Duckworth?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think it does partially. I mean, if I look at the graph, it's easy to kind of project or see that maybe we would have been in the neighborhood of, 11,000 some, maybe 12,000 applications heading into January without the announcing that the program would be shut down. Are you saying that you believe, based on what you're experiencing, that had you not announced that the agency would no longer be taking applications, that you still would have had somewhere in the neighborhood of 22,600?
Commissioner.
Chairman Draheim and Senator Duckworth, no. The short answer is no. But what I do know is that if I had stayed open for February, whether it was 5 days, 10 days, or all 20, I don't remember if it's leap year or not, all 28 days of February, that I wouldn't have enough money to pay out what would come in. And if I announced on January 25th that I was going to close on February 7th, I would have had the same surge of applications, but for a whole other group of people with February arrearages, and that would have oversubscribed the program, which I didn't think was a fiscally responsible decision to make.
Commissioner, one quick question. Of those 22,000 applicants, do you track what percentage of those had already applied in the previous timeframe, going back to April? So are we seeing repeat customers, more or less?
Chairman, you're 2 slides ahead of me. Can I catch up?
Thank you. I'll let you get back to your slide. Sorry.
So next slide, please. I think important context, I've run 2 emergency rental assistance programs now, but I've never had one open in January. Because we ran the CARES Act COVID-19 Housing Assistance Program in the second half of 2020, and we opened RentHelpMN in April of 2021. So this is my first January of experience. My understanding is that January typically has higher rent delinquencies. I see Cecil Schmidt is with us today, so he can probably speak much more knowledgeably about that. But people have lost seasonal work, perhaps. But then there were other unique factors this year, like the federal child tax credit payments ending in December and not being available in January. A lot of talk about it's a cold winter and rising costs of keeping our homes warm. And then, of course, in another surge of pandemic cases and the kind of economic topsy-turvy that creates. So I think, the fact that other assistance was no longer available to folks might have been a factor. It might just be a January thing. And obviously other states who had closed did anticipate that you would get a surge. I don't know, we don't have all the data sorted yet. It might be some folks who have newly heard about the program. It might be some folks who there's some procrastinators out there. We'll sort through what actually came in those final 3 days to really understand it compared to the rest of January, but we're not quite there yet. This has been a very active period for our staff to be able to keep an eye on all the numbers. Next slide, please. So to your question, Chairman, if you take a look at what came in through the deadline to submit, we have about 100,000 applications from 74,700 unique households. These numbers, I'll just let you know in advance, these numbers will shift a little bit. We still have paper applications, for example, that were postmarked by the deadline. There's just some other things. There's some pre-screening of things that just to make sure that we've got applications, not spam and other things. So there's just a little shifting in these numbers, but based on what we know today about what happened through the deadline, about 100,000 applications, 74,000 households. So let's say that you applied, last summer or fall, and you got your 3 months forward. You could come back in and reapply for additional assistance. The ERA-1, federal government Congress made that eligible for 15 months, ERA-2, the Congress said up to 18 months total between ERA-1 and ERA-2. So we've made 84,000 payments so far that represent 48,000 unique households. So as of last Friday, about $375 million. of assistance that's paid out. If you take a look at just the requests, you can see that the bulk of the requests are for rent, but we also do other utilities and things like that to a much smaller degree. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah, thank you.
Next slide, please. Payments. When we cleared the backlog in October and November, we've just kind of been in more of a steady state ever since. But you can see just the number of households by month there. And yeah, so just being able to, continue to monitor what do we have in, how much do we think we'll pay out, how much have we actually paid out, how much do we have left? That was a big part of the decision-making process. I know when we talked, you have to forgive me, sir, time is a little bit of a blur. But at one point in time, everybody was really concerned that we weren't going to meet the Treasury benchmarks and that we had to go faster. I think that, when all the dust settles, we'll have run one of the fastest state programs in the country in terms of how long it was open and how long it took to pay everything out. Another way to think about it is, yes, initially with that initial surge of applications, it did take us a while to work through to the payments, but now, we have applications that just came in January, some of which have already been paid. So the program is very different today than it was at the beginning of the fall, than it was when it first got up and running. A couple other slides before I wrap up here. One is that the Treasury had 2 deadlines where we could ask to get a reallocation of funds. I asked for $231 million based on their formula in November. But at the beginning of early January, I was told that we weren't going to get any. We were disappointed that we weren't going to get any, but it also was one of the factors in terms of how much money would we have available and how long could we keep the program up and running. And then we were allowed to ask again in January for more. Using their formula, I've asked for $212 million, but I don't expect, having not received anything in the first round of reallocations, we expect a second reallocation round would be smaller overall. So there's no reason to believe that I will get any reallocated funds from the Treasury Department. And there's no reason, I have nothing to predict when I would know whether or not I would get any funds from the Treasury. But the Treasury is basically signal, odds are slim. And then also, you'll be aware that we went to the governor and to the Legislative COVID-19 Response Commission for $7 million to help us with an admin supplement to that ERA-1 to finish processing all the ERA-1 dollars. All of ERA-1 was basically spent by Thanksgiving. And then we went in the fall for $20 million for additional assistance. We went back to the LCRC and asked for that to be a contingency fund for the amount of applications that we received at closure, and received that approval, I think, last week. Next slide, please. We've taken a number of steps to extend the funds when we knew that the application rate was continuing to accelerate. I mentioned on January 10th, we limited the amount of forward months, but also the whole time that we've operated the program, we've targeted the renters who are most at risk of eviction by having an eligibility criterion be that you needed to owe back rent. Next slide. So as we were thinking about when and how to set a deadline for applications, I mean, we always knew it was going to end. We always knew there was going to be an end, and that was going to, feel like a cliff for some. But I think a couple things. One is that when we got no reallocation from the Treasury, that really mean, that put the writing on the wall, along with what we were just seeing in terms of the January application trends. And staying open into February would have resulted in accepting more applications than we had funds to pay, which I think would have created a lot of confusion, chaos, some really just decision-making about who got paid and who didn't get paid. The next slide, I don't need to go over in detail, but there has just been some questions about the timing of the decision and the signaling of the message. These are some key dates in terms of how we came to the decision and the announcement. Happy to go over those in more detail if people have questions about that. I think one thing just to think about is that the run rate for this program is big. It's like $50 to $85 million a month. So it's not kind of at the margins, do you have a couple more million here or there? To be open for February and assume that any amount of time open in February would have attracted the vast majority of people who are behind in February means that you really had to think of, are we open in February at all or not at all? And that really was what ultimately drove the decision. Next slide, please. And I think at the end of the day, we accepted applications for as long as we could reasonably believe that we had available resources. I really think it'd be a disservice to property owners and renters alike to have people apply for money that probably wasn't going to be there. And I think it would have created a lot of confusion around the evictions protections. I think that it would have been a disservice to people who had to make the hard decision last week about were they going to pay their rent or something else if they thought I maybe was going to have money available that I didn't think I was going to have. And so ultimately, you know, this was the driving version. You know, why January 28th? And a couple things. Next slide, please. I operate with a board of directors. I needed to notice the board and have board approval to close for new applications and deadline. I wanted to be able to provide some notice for applicants so that folks could finish their applications. We also needed to take the portal down to do some system changing after the deadline so that we could, one, have the system not be available to take new applications, to provide information to people about the status of their applications. We really wanted to be back up and running on Monday, not only so people can track the status of their applications, but also so that we could be available to the courts on Monday, which we were able to do. And, you know, because people had to be past due in January to apply, you know, people already had, you know, all of the previous days of January to apply. So, you know, a lot of people, and because we had taken so many applications in, clearly a lot of people had. So those are really kind of the driving decisions. You know, most, and again, Mr. Smith can speak to this, but, you know, most rent is due on the 1st or the 15th of the month. So people who were in a past due position when I announced this on the 25th already knew that they were past due. I am just the rollout of the deadline. I'm almost done, sir. Board meeting the morning of the 25th. We got on the phone and we talked to many of the key stakeholders. I did a press conference that was very well attended by the press on the 25th at 1 o'clock to announce the deadline for submitting applications. We got a lot of media coverage throughout the state. We sent an e-news to 35,000 people who have been following this program through our e-news. We were able to reach renters who had started but not submitted applications. We doubled our server capacity before the announcement so that we could handle the surge. It was still a strain on the server, so we doubled the server capacity again. So we basically had quadruple the server capacity for the final days of the program. We had our field partners and the extraordinary team at 211 to do extra staffing to support applicants right up until the deadline. And we got that surge of applications as we expected. Next slide, the final tally. And I think Senator Duckworth, this goes to your question. In those final 3 days, over 11,000 applications. So the final 3 days of January, we received more applications than we received the first full month that we were up and running. We got over 5,000 applications on Friday alone. But as good as anybody can feel about this, I feel like the message was heard, because as we were tracking both callers to 211 and activity on RentHelpMN.org, the 211 call queue was at 0 at 9 p.m. on the deadline. And 5 minutes before the deadline, there were only 5 users online in the application portal. So it was a smooth execution of the deadline. And again, we were back up and running again on Monday to be able to support the courts and for people to be able to have their requests being processed and to track the status of those. I think I just want to end by acknowledging that a lot of households relied on this assistance. And it really, has been and will continue to be a win-win as we process these claims for folks. But for folks who are behind in February, this is hard. And so we're also providing information on our website about other assistance that's available, energy assistance, the other jurisdictions, the tribes may have stuff, county emergency assistance, things that existed before the pandemic. But I think, the impact of this program has been really remarkable when you think about, nearly $500 million to help folks be able to pay the rent and owners being able to pay their mortgages and their bills. But I think what we've learned through all this is that there's just a lot of people who can't afford to pay their rent. And with that, sir, I would be happy to take any and all questions. I also am aware of the time, so
Yep. Thank you.
as you see fit.
Yep, thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that. I just had a math question, I guess. When I'm looking at page 12 and 13, you talk about payments made through January 31st. And then on the right, on 13, you have household helped. When I add those up, it's a different number than what the number was on page 12, which I know is a different date, but it was a date further on, it was 2/4, and the date on page 13 is supposed to be January 31st, but yet the January 31st date is higher than the February 4th date. So I don't, if you could get us some clarity on that, that would be wonderful. So right there on 12 in the middle where it says 48,079 unique households made, and then there's an asterisk that said payment data is through 2/4. And then if you go to the next page, page 13, if you total up that right column, I believe that's 57,000 and change. And that says made through January 31st. So it could just be an adding error or what, but something there just didn't make sense to me. Unless you have a, go ahead.
Chairman, no, thank you. I mean, there's 3 different types of numbers, and there's numbers around requests made, and there's numbers between payouts made. So we have households, we have payments, and we have dollars, and then we have requested and paid. And the dashboard was updated on Monday and has the most recent information. So you can see that online, and we adjust that regularly.
So Commissioner, payments don't mean payments. I assume payments meant that you mailed the check, so that isn't what payments mean?
Chairman, there's dollars out the door, and one application can have 4 payments, because you can have a household where the property is getting the rent arrearages, and then you're paying on 3 separate utilities. So a household and a payment are not the same. What I'm taking from this is a wildly unhelpful slide as written, and I will take that feedback to my team and make sure that when I come in and present the information to you, you understand the different things that are being tracked by the different parts.
Thank you, Commissioner. I was just looking at the households helped and not the dollar amount. I understand that it could be multiple payments, but it would still be the same household. The off-ramp, I'll call it, or the end of the program, I know Senator Deidre and myself had sent you a letter trying to be part of the solution on the ending of that program. And, I'm not going to get into that issue, but I would like to ask, with such a short window of closing the program, and I got reports that the software was down, the RentHelpMN the website was down. Do you have any data for us on how much it was down that last 3 days that it was open?
Thank you for the question and the opportunity to go back over that again. So when we knew that we were going to make the announcement, if the board approved it on the 25th, we doubled the server capacity before the announcement was made in anticipation of increased traffic. The amount of traffic that was on the website that Wednesday morning did strain the website. It didn't go down. My IT staff, I don't have an IT background, so I don't get all those words, but some people were having a hard time accessing the system. So we were down for minutes when we quadrupled the server capacity. So that when by about 10 something on Wednesday morning, the system was running at 4 times what it had run prior to the announcement, and it ran smoothly through the deadline Friday night.
Okay, thank you. And then my last comment or question, you had mentioned about having to get it done by the end of January for the courts. What kind of assistance, besides having your staff volunteer to help with those court proceedings, did Rent Help provide for the courts or any affiliated partner, for the court system?
Chairman Draheim, because the evictions off-ramp was tied to whether or not somebody had a pending application in any of the federal emergency rental assistance programs, we had the courts reach out to us right after that legislation was passed to ask how would they know whether or not somebody had a pending application. And so we worked out an arrangement with the 10 regions that I don't know a lot about the courts. Minnesota Housing traditionally has not done a lot of work with the courts, but we worked with them so that we would have staff who, if a housing court was in session and somebody needed to know the status of an application, we could verify the status of the application in timing that respected the docket of the court. And so we've had requests for status on 1,300 applications.
So that was all online? There was no letters sent out or emails or anything like that? It was just through the portal?
Chairman, no, we actually had staff who were assigned to each of the 10 court jurisdictions. So during housing court, the court could call somebody who was there to support what they needed in the real time of court. If court had to, it didn't seem right to ask the judges to be interpreters of the portal, and we couldn't ask the judges to kind of be in queue on 211 like others would have been about the status of an application. And so we really did it to support the courts to be able to make decisions about whether eviction cases that they were hearing in real time met the criteria of the evictions moratorium.
Okay, thank you. We have some questions in the room here. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, especially for some of the context and the lead up to this. Obviously, agency got a lot of money out the door into the hands of a lot of people. Certainly don't want to take that away from you and the work that was done there. I have some questions as to sort of where the agency stands now in terms of some of those funds. So could you give me a sense, I mean, with all the applications that came in January, are all the funds spoken for? Are you still working through that process? Do we know how many are still pending? That's kind of where my mind is at now, and I'll have a follow-up or two after I hear what you have to say about that one, please.
Chairman Draheim and Senator Duckworth, it will take a little time for the dust to settle on exactly how much I'll pay out and what it will cost. The dashboard does a pretty good job of just helping folks track that. But remember, every single one of these applications requires a human being to work with both the renter and the owner to make sure that we have the right information so we're making the right payments to the right entity. And in that back and forth, as it has since the beginning of the program, sometimes that takes some time. If we have an application that has everything that we need from day one, we can move through those pretty quickly. But some of these require more back and forth, and we don't actually know how much we'll pay until we get a little closer. The other thing that we know is an uncertainty that needs to be resolved is whether we have the same relative acceptance versus ineligible rate for the things that came in at the very end. Or do those requests for assistance look substantially different than requests for assistance that came in before there was a known deadline? And that will require actually just working through applications to figure out whether they look the same or look different than ones that came in before the deadline. And it's just, I've got some great people that are on this, but this is a lot of information. I'm not a computer person, so I'm going to say some words that don't mean anything to me, but it's compelling to me. It's 4 terabytes of data. And so for us to even just do an extract of the data from the database, you can't do that on the computer like what I'm talking to you from now. And it's kind of, this is big data crunching because of the enormity of the program. I suspect that I'll be back here on a number of occasions throughout the course of the session to be able to report on how this is. I think with each passing week, as we get through more and more of the claims that came in January, we'll have a clearer picture of where that's at.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do you have a follow-up?
I do, if it could be briefly.
Real brief follow-up with Senator Duckworth, and we're going to go to Senator Deems.
Thank you. So I guess I would grant you that high volume of applications coming in, but, I would say the agency, in the months that it had been working this program and developing the processes for it and gaining experience with it, I guess I wonder why there's not the ability to maybe forecast when you might think you'll be out the duration of the funds. I mean, given the experience of the months doing the program, because to your point, bad news only gets worse with age, and if we had to estimate a timeline or a deadline as to when we think the funds are exhausted based on past experience over the last few months, I think that would be helpful. Really, it's a fancy way of me saying, when can we tell people that have pending applications if they're going to get money or not? Because I'm sure that's obviously what's on their minds. Or is there still money left over? And if there is, does that mean we're reopening the program? If there's not money left over and there are pending applications that aren't going to get paid, what are we going to do? What's their status going to be? Do we close them out? Do they remain pending? I know I'm throwing a lot of questions at you, but those are, I think, some of the more poignant questions that need to be answered moving forward sooner rather than later, especially now that we have months and months of data that we can look back on to do some of this forecasting. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back over. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Deems.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Ho. I just want to talk a little on the portal and on when you turned it off and this and that. But we talked earlier about the courts and pending applications. So when you increase the ability to handle all these applications, were you at that point, did you think you had money to pay those? You had been notified that you weren't going to receive the additional funds you requested, and that's one of the reasons that I'm hearing that caused you to discontinue the program. So I'm wondering why you tried to get so many applications in right at the end when it would appear that you knew there wouldn't be money to pay those applications.
Commissioner?
Chairman Draheim and Senator Dames, thanks for the question, and it gives me an opportunity just to clarify. The program is still running. The program is still running. We're paying out every banking day. We're making payments, and we made the information about setting the deadline for new applications based on information that was coming at us in January, both not getting money from the Treasury, reallocation, and the pace of claims. I was thinking of this as kind of an over and under. There's no way that I was going to accept exactly the number of applications that would reflect exactly the amount of money that I had. And so therefore, I was either going to be over or under at the end of the day, right? I knew that if I was open in February, I would be over. I believed with the best information that was available to me, including from other states that had already closed, that we would see a rush in applications in the final days, but I felt I owed it to people to give them some notice instead of just abruptly saying the program's closed to new applications. And I knew that in that period between when I announced and the deadline, we would see a surge, and we did. I will not know exactly how much we pay out until we're further along in the processing, but I have reason to believe that by closing the program to new applications, having an application deadline in January, I was going to be in a position where I could pay the applications that had already come in and that would come in between the announcement and the closure. I don't have any reason, even based on 22,000 applications and 11,000 coming in the final week, I don't have any reason to believe that I will not be able to pay on the applications that are in the system today. But I also know that the January experience for us looked different than other months. And so, yes, we can understand what our experience in previous months has been, but we also need to expect that our experience with the January requests is going to look a little different than the experience with previous months.
Thank you, Commissioner. We got Senator Port waiting. I think Senator Deems has a quick follow-up. And then you're good for now?
Yeah.
And we do have some more testifiers, so I want to make sure that we have time to get to everybody. Senator Port, thanks for your patience. Do you have a quick question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair and Commissioner. I want to take a minute first to thank you, Commissioner Ho, and your staff for your continual conversations about this through what has been a very challenging process, and the work that you and your staff have done to get $450 million out into the hands of folks who needed it to stay stable in their homes during this pandemic. I think it's important that we remember that. I also want to flag that I hope that this committee, as we heard today, the need is ongoing, and I hope that we will work to hear proposals about that ongoing need for rental assistance and how we can potentially use some of the surplus to address that need. Commissioner Ho, my question for you is, if the legislature or the feds decide to put more money into rental assistance, knowing what you've learned through this process, through Rent Help, are there changes you would make? Are there different ways you would prefer that the legislature allocate this money to make sure that it is, easily gotten out to the folks who need it? Can you bring this program back online? Is doing it through Rent Help the best way? What are your thoughts on that?
Commissioner?
Chairman, and I'll be very brief because I know you want to get others on, but I would entertain other opportunities to talk about this at length. Time is of the essence. It's February, people are behind, and this program isn't available anymore. And as the weeks and months pass, and I work through the applications that have come, we will begin shutting this program down. The evictions off-ramp is tied to having a pending application in a federal emergency rental assistance program. So if the legislature were to decide to put more money in it, I would say doing it quickly and doing it in a way that either aligns with existing evictions moratorium or just understanding what you want to do with that would be really important. So, for example, there are also the state fiscal recovery funds that are on the table and being debated and other things. So there's just some things that need to happen. Because time is of the essence and because the off-ramp ends on June 1st, doing something wholly different and new, if you wanted to do something brief, wouldn't be my advice. But that depends on whether you wanted to do something for 1 month, 4 months, in the tails. But I think that is just really an important part of the discussion, and be happy to engage in those conversations as session moves forward.
Thank you, Commissioner and Senator Port. Members, if we have more questions, let's, you can sure email them to me and we'll send them off to the agency. We need to get on to our other speakers, our presenters.
Sir,
So thank you.
I'll stay in the room, but I'm just going to go off camera.
Perfect. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, sir.
I'm going to butcher this name. I apologize in advance. Nilima, and I cannot pronounce your last name. I apologize. The Executive Director with the African Career Education and Resource, Inc. Are you available?
Yes, I am, Senator Graham.
And I apologize for butchering your name, but could you give the correct pronunciation for us?
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. My names are Nelima Sitati Monene. I'm the Executive Director of ACER Inc., the African Career Education and Resources Inc. We're an issue-based organization, and housing justice is a big bucket of our work. And I'm here to testify about the Emergency Rental Assistance Program and to talk about our work as a field partner and experiences of both a community organization and a field partner. So ACER was one of the many field partners and still is that was contracted by Minnesota Housing Finance Agency for the Rent Help Minnesota program. And our task as a field partner was to extend access to the program to our communities, and especially hard to reach communities. The program was online, and so there were a number of community members who did not have access to the internet, who had difficulty navigating the program for one reason or another, whether it was lack of electronic access or just the ability to be able to upload the documents that were required, or just understanding the program. There are a big number of our community members who had language barriers as well. So as a community organization, we were interested in being a field partner and partnering with the agency because we were very much interested in seeing our community supported, and we had been one of the main advocates in the beginning, advocating for people to get the assistance that they needed. So overall, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program was very important because it was key in preventing evictions and displacement from housing and reducing the homelessness situation that we would have otherwise run into. And so we're thankful that the federal government took unprecedented action, to boost incomes and provide the rental assistance that many households needed. And it was very critical in supporting not only the rental housing economy, but ensuring that, people's rent was paid and bills that otherwise would not have been paid were paid. It also provided housing stability for students, which was really essential, especially in the midst of a pandemic and with online schooling. But also a big part of it, and why as housing advocates who were advocating for the program, was because in the absence of a vaccination, of an antidote at that time, housing became key, for us as a community and as a state and as a nation to be able to control the pandemic that we were faced with. And so it just emphasized the need to continue supporting housing and the importance that access to housing plays in our community. So as fellow partners, as I mentioned before, our job was to increase access of the program to the communities, and especially for people who had challenges accessing it. And I think we did play a critical role, and the program itself played a critical role in providing support, not just to our communities, but also making sure that landlords were getting, their rents paid. So, for example, we do a lot of our work, in the northwest suburbs. And I remember one of the apartment communities in Brooklyn Center, the manager mentioned to us that even though they were having difficulty collecting rent in their other properties, because they have properties in Minnesota and in Wisconsin, the property that they had in Brooklyn Center had the highest rate of rent payment, because we were working very closely, with the tenants. And so overall, even though the program is no longer taking applications, we're still continuing to work with folks who have applications in, still helping them with the navigation process. As has been mentioned before, there's still a great need that remains, for folks still need help, paying their rent. We still need the program, to continue. The impact of the program has been great. People were able to stay in their homes. And also, it also to date is the biggest program for any agency of any of the other state agencies of all the programs that were run. I think the RentHelp program was the largest program that was being run in response to the pandemic. So that is all I have for the committee, unless anyone has questions.
Senator, thank you. And Senator Deidre, did you have a question or comment?
Yes, I have a quick question, and it's more of a kind of a thought. I don't expect an answer right now, and for time, probably would prefer you kind of think about it and send another answer. But I do want to thank Acer and all the other navigators who are helping, because I think for a lot of people that had barriers with either their computer skills or just having access to a computer or having language barriers, I think these navigators were extremely helpful in getting rent help. If we had to, hopefully we never have to do this again, and we don't have a pandemic for at least another 100 years, but if you could kind of put your thoughts together on what worked, what didn't work, what you needed, what would have been helpful for you all to see differently or to be able to do differently to make any program either like this or any other emergency rental assistance program going forward more effective and easier and helpful to people that, again, are looking for a job, have a job, but don't make enough money, have kids. There's just a lot going on in everyday life. And so how do you make this work? And so any thoughts you would have would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Deidre, and thank you for testifying.
Yeah, just one final thing I'll say. Yeah, we do have, and I've had several conversations, Senator Deidre, I'll be happy to send those to you and to the committee as a whole.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Members, next up, we have Deidre Schmidt with Common Bond Communities.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Draheim and members of the committee. I really appreciate your attention to this matter. Common Bond, where I'm the president and CEO, serves over 12,000 people in 125 different locations in over 7,000 homes. And the average annual income for households in units that we own is about $19,000 a year. So these are frontline retail workers, hardworking families, but really living every day on on the edge of financial security. The majority of the folks we house are female heads of households and also people of color. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about RentHelpMN and our use of the platform and the program. To date, we have helped 935 households in their applications through RentHelpMN. And the total dollar amount is about $3.9 million. So it averages $4,100 per household. Now, about a quarter of those folks who made an application, who live with us, who made an application, made that application in the last month of the portal being open. That's totaling about $840,000. So slightly lower on average ask in that last month, but certainly a lot of volume coming through. So when I saw that slide that the commissioner showed, that certainly was consistent with our experience. Now, it's Common Bond's practice to do everything that we can to help renters get the resources they need to make good on their rent obligations. And so we've always prioritized for this. We have what we call advantaged service workers who help, among other things, folks understand and meet their rent obligations, not unlike the role that Malima's organization was describing. We always put a lot of time into this. I have to tell you, the amount of time and energy that our organization has put in to helping residents in these most basic financial obligations for rent payment has been really overwhelming. Now, also in our experience, and I think this is relevant to this discussion, some residents can struggle to prioritize making an application for rental assistance until there is an imminent threat of eviction, a toughening stance on the part of the landlord, or really extraordinary intervention. And this is what Common Bond provides for many residents. The majority of renters in Minnesota don't have the benefit of one of Malima's staff or a Common Bond staff person. So I just want to say this is not a typical experience. So in our definition, someone is in threat of eviction if they have more than 2.5 months rent overdue, and that they don't have a pending application already to RentHelpMN or another source, and they haven't initiated a payment plan. So it's really folks who are totally MOA and disengaged, not actively engaged with us. Now, we have currently about 50 households who are in this non-responsive category across all of our 7,000 households. And we were in the middle of giving those households kind of the final offer for help at the time that RentHelp Minnesota the closure was announced. And unfortunately, the timing of our stepping up of that kind of, the wake-up call to residents didn't correspond well with the closing of RentHelpMN, and so many of those folks will not be able to, at this point, unless the portal reopens, be able to make an application. But I will say that also in that body of experience, we have received about $1.5 million to date. We have another 830 approved but not yet paid. So when you were asking about, why don't these numbers total, we do have, assurance of the agency that funding has been allocated, and we will receive payment for that additional 830K. We also have 735,000 in applications that are still in review. And overall, the rejection rate in our portfolio with our assistance in making applications has been about 13%. So about 89 households for a total of about $530,000 in rental assistance that folks were deemed ineligible to receive. We also have $240,000 worth of requests for 79 households that are considered incomplete applications. And so those folks are in a bit of limbo. I just also want to point out that we know that a lot of folks during COVID have self-evicted. They've determined that they don't have hope that their incomes will return, and they aren't hopeful that they will be receiving rental or other assistance. And so they have doubled up, moved back home. Some have chosen to be less than ideally housed. I also want to say that we've distributed about $500,000 in private rental assistance. So Common Bonds donors responded with generosity to help folks who might have fallen through the cracks in various programs to be able to maintain their housing.
So I'm going to have to cut you off there. We got one more testifier. I appreciate it. Thank you for all you do. And if you could send the committee some of those numbers, that would be greatly appreciated. And I would like to have another conversation about the people that weren't successful in getting some of these funds and just kind of unpack that a little bit when we have more time. So thank you very much. Next up, we have Cecil Schmidt, President and CEO of Minnesota Multi-Housing Association. Cecil, thank you for being so patient. You are the last testifier, but we will give you plenty of time to go through your slides.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be with you today and the members of the committee. The Minnesota Multi-Housing Association has approximately 1,800 members. We are responsible for over 300,000 units of housing in the state of Minnesota as the trade association of managers and owners of multifamily housing in the state. Obviously, that meant that we participated significantly in the Rent Help Minnesota program and had a variety of experiences. I think you have a slide deck that we're going to walk through.
Sorry, Cecil, we're trying to get the slides up for you.
Yep, that's great. I'll keep talking. So one of the things that we did during the height of the crisis with the pandemic was we did monthly rent collection surveys. And we were tracking what was happening month by month with rent collections as the 6th of the month came around. That was very instructive to us in terms of monitoring the distress that was happening in the marketplace. And you can see there was obviously the very significant fall off across all classes of assets as the pandemic and the shutdown took effect with the incredible numbers of people who were laid off and made unemployed. A historic event. But it rapidly stabilized. And you can see that we still had excellent rent collections. Minnesota renters really stepped up and held to their responsibilities and found ways to do that. And obviously, different programs rolled out. CHAP rolled out as one form of federal assistance that Minnesota was able to provide to renters to keep them stably housed and to keep our properties cash flowing and maintain the safety and reliability of that housing. And they just continued to improve as we reopened the economy. And it got to the point in August, in the summer, where we decided to end the surveying because we were returning almost to previous levels of payments. And we looked again in August as we were getting closer to the first step of the eviction moratorium off-ramp, and again saw stability. Now we're going to survey again. The survey is out. I'm hoping to get that data this evening, and we'll process it in the next 24 to 48 hours and report on what is happening in the market. So we really understand the level of distress that might be out there following the closure of RentHelpMN. On the next slide, you can see the change in outstanding balances as we went from August 2020 to July and August of 2021, as we started to see the accumulation of unpaid rent, which was the need that we had with RentHelpMN, which still in August really wasn't being met. And you can see from the slides that the Commissioner shared, there was a very slow rollout. There was accumulating rent, and payments were just trickling out at the beginning. We believe that most of that has been taken care of. Again, we will understand that data in the next 24 to 48 hours, where we really stand in terms of outstanding balances. Clearly, as my colleague Deidre Schmidt has indicated, there still is some. There's still pending payments. There are still residents who are waiting checks, and so there will be something that we'll see there, but we're hoping that that has been curtailed to some extent with the very generous support that renters and property owners have received through the federal assistance. Just to talk a little bit about the frustration that we've had as an industry with this program, it was a very significant point of pain last summer. This program rolled out in April. We surveyed in May to find out what was happening and what the user experience was, and it was awful. They were very, very frustrated, and the agency was getting the program up and running, and you can see from the slides that you saw on, I believe it's page 13, from the Commissioner, that there were 371 payments that were made. No, it's not that page. It was 2.2 million that was made in May, and then I'm not sure what slide that was, but it was a very small number of payments, and there were 20,000 applications at that point in time, which was incredibly frustrating for the renters, especially, who were very uncertain about their housing, and property owners, especially certain portfolios and particular properties. It wasn't widespread, but there were pockets of severe distress, and there was a real risk of foreclosure at some of those properties. That got resolved, especially with the massive tranche of funding of the $100 million that poured out in October, right before the deadline. And suddenly we were swamped with payments. And then we get to January, and everything is ticking along. We're watching the dashboard, and then we have this very abrupt end to RentHelpMN and 3 days of trying to get residents to get applications in if they had past due balances. That was the struggle. And by all accounts, everybody got in that wanted to get in and needed to get in at the end of the program. So CHAP was a frustrating program, but it was better than RentHelpMN at the beginning. The Zero Balance Project, I think, which is the other federal assistance program that ran through the counties, really was the gold star program. And I think there are best practices there that are worth studying and understanding if the legislature wants to contemplate another rental assistance program. But alternatively, we would recommend that, as we have in the past with residents who have struggled with fiscal emergencies and their family budgets, recommended that they turn to the counties and the emergency assistance programs that are available at the counties. We also think that that's financially prudent because it is looking at income eligibility and a determined need, because I'll just tell you from my own portfolio as an owner-operator, I have residents who applied. They met the eligibility requirements, but they were fully employed and had income. And in fact, even as they got advance payments of rent, restarted paying rent so that they have credit balances on their accounts with us, which is great for them. And certainly, this is trillions of dollars that the federal government sent to all across our country, and Minnesotans have been able to participate in that generosity. So just one final point on evictions. I know that's been discussed here, and obviously the point of all this rental assistance as a federal program in terms of, and our involvement as a state was to prevent evictions. The data is very, very clear that there's been widespread success across Minnesota with that. We're at 30% on average below prior eviction counts in Minnesota. In fact, in January, our normal average is about 1,500 evictions. And right now, as of January 29th, there were 942, 36% below the average. So I think it's really prudent that we keep monitoring that situation. But obviously, pre-pandemic, Minnesota was one of the lowest evicting states. We were in the bottom 5. And we are even lower than what we were in 2019, which is cause for celebration. Obviously, any eviction is a disaster for that family. It is terrible for the owner or operator to have to work through that process. Every eviction should be avoided, but in generalities, we're doing very, very well on that front, and I hope that continues. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your time.
Cecil, if I could ask you a quick question on evictions there at the end. What advice are you giving your members on evictions? We heard today that the financial part of the program will end paying rent through February. So after March 1st, what does a housing provider do with tenants that don't pay moving forward? What advice are you giving your members?
Chair Draheim, the advice that we would give members is to follow their standard fair housing procedures, treating everybody equitably, and using the processes that they have established to make sure that there is fair treatment. I know many of my members will often give a month's grace. Sometimes their eviction processes start on the 10th or the 15th of the month. Different businesses have different business processes which they have to follow consistently under fair housing, and we would recommend that they would follow those. I am not allowed to make the market. That would be a violation of federal and state antitrust laws, but we would recommend that they look carefully at the residents' circumstances, help them look for whatever assistance may be available and to access that assistance, because as we all know in our business, an eviction is a very expensive process. There are legal costs, there are time costs, there are significant disruptions. It is a painful process financially and emotionally for everybody involved. So eviction prevention is a priority, but I think one of the things that we're looking to get clarity on is understanding pending applications and the protections under the existing state law, and looking for clarity as that moves forward, how we get information about when an application is no longer pending, and so therefore the status would then move to eligibility for an eviction for non-payment of rent.
Thank you for your testimony and your time. Members, I just have one last question for the commissioner. I want to thank all of the presenters and the committee members that are here. Commissioner, what advice, or maybe one of your staff if you're not available, what advice are you giving housing providers when come March, when they can't collect any more funds off of the Rent Help program for evictions? What advice are you giving, or what message can we put out to the public moving forward after February?
Chairman and members of the committee, I think I have to get back to you on that, because I don't know that we're not in the business of doing that. So I would take input, and we'll figure out, I'll get a better answer for you.
Okay, I appreciate that. Senator Duckworth, you have 10 seconds.
I have 10 seconds. Commissioner, I just want to make sure I understood a statement that I think I heard you made earlier, which is you believe that you have enough funds still remaining to meet the needs of the applications that are in or are pending. Did I understand you correctly when you said that? It was when you were talking about the over and under situation.
Chairman and Senator Duckworth, yes, we made the decision to close in January in order to decrease the likelihood that we would have a large overage. I am optimistic that with some of the variables in play, that we will be able to pay the claims that are processed, but we will not know for a fact until we have been able to work through the lion's share of the things that came in January.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions, members? Okay, Commissioner, if you don't mind, we will have some follow-up for you, but I really appreciate your time, and look forward to seeing you again on later this week. Members, I appreciate everyone's time. We are adjourned.